The street beds. If you've ever walked through Delhi at night, you know the city doesn't sleep. It just changes form. The daytime noise fades into a dull hum of rickshaws, dogs barking, and the occasional echo of a temple bell. The air is thick with dust and spice, and the streetlights hang low, glowing a tired orange. That's when the streets fill with beds. Not real beds, just people lying on the ground, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in faded blankets or thin sheets. Some rest their heads on rolled-up shirts, others on nothing at all. Men, women, even kids. They sleep along the sidewalks, under overpasses, in front of shuttered shops. The first time you see it, you freeze. It feels wrong, like you've walked into a room where everyone's pretending to be dead. That night I was heading back to my hotel in Paharganj, the backpacker district. It was past midnight, and my driver had dropped me off a few blocks away because of road work. The hotel wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute walk, but those 10 minutes turned into something I still can't explain. The street was narrow, lined with sleeping bodies. I hesitated, unsure where to step. I whispered a soft, "Sorry," as I tiptoed between them, careful not to step on someone's arm or blanket. The air smelled of sweat, incense, and fried food left to rot. Every few feet, I'd glance around. No one awake. No movement except the faint rise and fall of chests breathing in sync. At first, it was almost peaceful. Then I realized it was too peaceful. The sound of traffic in the distance stopped. Even the dogs had gone silent. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. I looked around again. The people, dozens of them, were no longer breathing. Not one chest moved. Not one body twitched. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the world. I froze mid-step, my foot hovering above the pavement. I waited for someone to move, to shift in their sleep, to snore, anything. Nothing. And then came the cold. Not a breeze, not the night air, but a slow, creeping chill that started at the base of my spine and crawled upward. It felt like fingers. Cold, dry fingers, tracing my back through the fabric of my shirt. I wanted to turn, to brush it off, but my body wouldn't listen. My breath came out in shallow gasps. The world felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. Then I heard it. A whisper, right behind my ear. Low, steady, and clear. In English that sounded too exact to be human. "Lie down!" I spun around so fast I almost tripped, but there was no one. Just the still line of sleeping figures, motionless and pale, under the streetlights. My mind raced. Was it a prank? Someone hiding nearby? I scanned the shadows between buildings. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sound at all. Then something shifted at the edge of my vision. A hand twitched, then another. One by one, the sleeping people began to breathe again, but not like before. It was synchronized. Deep inhale, pause, slow exhale, over and over, like one giant lung. I took a step back. The nearest man's eyes were open. Not blinking, not rolling, just open, staring straight ahead. His chest moved with the same rhythm as the others. His lips parted slightly, but he didn't seem alive. Then they all opened their eyes. Hundreds of dark eyes in the dim orange light, fixed on me. No one sat up, no one spoke, but the air shifted again. That same whisper. No, not one voice this time, but many, echoed from everywhere at once. "Here! Lie down." I ran. I didn't look where I was stepping. My foot hit something soft, and someone groaned, but I didn't stop. I sprinted toward the end of the block, toward the bright sign of a tea stall that was still open. When I reached it, I turned around. The street was empty. No people, no blankets, no sleeping bodies. Just a stretch of road with scattered newspapers and a stray dog sniffing at the curb. The man at the stall looked at me like I was crazy. He asked if I wanted chai. I nodded, hands shaking, and downed the whole cup in seconds. When I turned to look again, the street was still empty. I got back to the hotel somehow, locked my door, turned on every light, and lay on the bed fully clothed. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I went back to that street. It was busy again. Vendors shouting, tuk-tuks honking, cows blocking traffic. But the ground, it was covered in faint white chalk outlines, like the kind police use. Dozens of them, overlapping, stretching as far as I could see. I asked a fruit seller what had happened. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. Every night, he said, they sleep there. Some wake up, some don't. I told him that last night, they'd all vanished. He shrugged. Then maybe you walked on the wrong road. He went back to arranging his oranges, humming a tune I didn't recognize. That night, I tried not to think about it. But when I turned off the lights in my hotel room, the sound came back. The slow, steady rhythm of synchronized breathing. It wasn't outside. It was under the bed. The offering line. If you've ever been to India during festival season, you know what chaos feels like. But in the best, most overwhelming way. Colors everywhere, the smell of incense and fried sweets mixing in the air, bells ringing from every direction. I was in Chennai that day, near an old Hindu temple that my local guide said was good for removing bad luck. I don't really believe in that sort of thing, but when you're traveling alone, sometimes superstition feels like insurance. The temple was centuries old, carved stone towers covered with tiny statues of gods and demons, all painted in bright blues, reds, and yellows. Even from a block away, you could hear the chant of mantras blending with the hum of the crowd. A line of barefoot worshippers stretched from the gate all the way to the street corner, each holding a small basket or a garland of flowers, offerings for the gods. I didn't plan to go inside. I was just watching from the side, camera slung over my shoulder. But a woman selling marigold garlands caught my eye. She smiled, pressed one into my hand, and said something in Tamil I didn't understand. Before I could refuse, she waved me toward the line. Everyone else looked at me and laughed. Not meanly, more like, "Come on, tourist, join us." So I did. The line moved slowly. The sun was heavy, pressing down on my neck, and the smell of jasmine and sweat mixed in the air. People were murmuring prayers under their breath. Some had red or yellow powder smeared on their foreheads. Tilak, the mark of devotion. I tried to blend in, copying what others did. When the person in front of me moved forward, I stepped up too, holding my garland carefully. That's when I noticed him, the man ahead of me. He was tall, thin, wearing a white dhoti and a faded shawl. His skin had a strange gray tint, like he hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. He held a garland too, one made of darker flowers, almost brownish red instead of yellow. He didn't turn around, didn't move much, just stood perfectly still, head slightly bowed. The line inched forward. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. When I looked up again, he was gone. At first, I thought maybe he'd stepped aside. People were moving around all the time, families cutting in, kids running past, but when I reached the temple gate, there was no sign of him. Just an empty space where he'd been standing. I shrugged it off and kept going. Maybe he'd gone inside already. When I reached the offering area, a priest stood behind a small stone table, covered in ash, rice, and petals. He took each person's garland, chanted something, then placed it on the altar before handing back a few flower petals as a blessing. When it was my turn, I held out my garland. Except, it wasn't one anymore. I froze. I was holding 2 garlands, identical except for the colors. One bright orange-yellow, one dark reddish-brown. I blinked, looked down again. No mistake. My hands were full, the stems tangled together like they'd grown that way. The priest frowned, confused. 2? He asked in English. No, I just bought one, I said. My voice came out weak. There was a man in front of me. The priest tilted his head but said nothing. He reached out, took the darker garland from my hand, and placed it on a small stone figure beside the altar, a fierce-looking deity with wide eyes and fangs. The other garland he set on a calmer figure beside it, serene and smiling. I couldn't tell if it was a god or goddess, but the contrast between the two was uncomfortable. Then came the whisper, right behind me. "One is mine." It wasn't a shout, not even a clear voice, just a breath, deep and low, so close it brushed against my ear. My skin went cold. I spun around, expecting to see the tall man again. No one. Just the line of people moving forward, eyes down, lips moving in silent prayer. No one even glanced my way. I turned back to the altar. The priest was watching me carefully now. His face looked tense. "You heard it," he said quietly, not asking but stating. I didn't answer. He gestured for me to step closer. "Offer both," he said. "Don't keep one." I didn't mean I started, but he cut me off, his tone sharper. "Offer both." I did as he said. He sprinkled water over the garlands, rang a small bell, and chanted a few words I couldn't understand. Then he took a pinch of ash from a metal bowl and pressed it onto my forehead. "Now go," he said. "Do not look back." That last part hit me wrong. The way he said it wasn't casual. It was an order. Something about his eyes told me not to argue. I stepped away slowly. The crowd behind me closed in, and soon I was back on the street. The noise of the market hit me all at once. Motorbikes, vendors, children shouting. The world felt normal again, until I smelled the flowers. The same heavy scent of marigold and iron, coming from behind me. I turned before I could stop myself. The crowd at the temple gate looked the same. Busy, colorful, alive. But there, between the people, I saw him again. The tall man in white, standing just inside the shadow of the gate, head bowed, the dark garland back in his hand. And this time, he was looking right at me. Our eyes met for less than a second, but it felt longer. His expression didn't change. Then someone passed in front of me, a kid selling coconuts, and when I looked again, he was gone. I walked straight to my hotel after that. Didn't stop, didn't talk to anyone. I took a shower, trying to wash off the temple dust, but the scent of those flowers stayed on my hands, no matter how much soap I used. That night I dreamed of the offering line. The same scene, over and over. People moving forward, handing over flowers, bowing, leaving. And always, right before my turn, that tall man in white. When he reached the altar, he didn't hand his garland to the priest. He turned around, and his face, his eyes, were hollow. Not empty, not blind, just hollow. Like someone had carved them out and filled them with shadow. He reached toward me, his hand outstretched, and said again, in that same quiet, steady voice, "One is mine." I woke up before dawn, gasping. My heart was pounding. my forehead still cold where the ash had been pressed. I looked down at the nightstand, and there, beside my phone, was a single marigold petal. Fresh, bright orange, and damp with dew. I never went back to that temple. The second rickshaw. If you've ever taken a rickshaw in India at night, you know that strange mix of peace and chaos that lives in those streets. The engine hums like a giant mosquito. The driver hums something you can't quite place. And the air smells like dust, smoke, and fried food all at once. It's the kind of setting that feels alive, even when everything else around you has gone to sleep. It was late, close to midnight, when I left a friend's guest house in Varanasi. The streetlights flickered every few seconds, throwing long shadows over the cracked pavement. I waved down a rickshaw, one of those motorized ones with a sputtering engine, and a driver who looked half asleep. He nodded when I gave him the name of my hotel and motioned for me to hop in. The seat was sticky with the day's heat. The vinyl stuck to the back of my legs as we started moving. I leaned out to feel the breeze, trying to ignore the smell of diesel and the faint sweetness of incense that still hung in the air. The streets were mostly empty. Just a few stray dogs, a cart or two, and distant music from a wedding procession somewhere across the river. For the first few minutes, it was calm. The driver didn't say much, just coughed every now and then. I looked out the side as we passed under a row of dim lights, and that's when I saw it. Our shadow. Or shadows. There were two. At first, I thought it was just the lighting. Some overlap from the street lamps, but as the rickshaw moved, so did both shadows, side by side. The shape of the one on the left was ours, matching perfectly. The small roof, the wheels, the driver's outline. The one on the right was the same too, identical, except there wasn't another rickshaw next to us. I leaned out farther, squinting. The road beside us was empty. Still, the second shadow stayed, running alongside us, keeping pace like some kind of echo. "Do you see that?" I asked the driver. He didn't turn around, didn't even flinch. I figured maybe he didn't hear me over the noise of the engine, so I tapped his shoulder and pointed. "There. Look at that shadow." He finally glanced to the side, just for a second, and his shoulders stiffened. Then he looked straight ahead again and said nothing. We drove on. The lights grew sparser, and the air felt heavier. I checked again. The two shadows were still there, stretching long and thin over the uneven road. I started counting lampposts, hoping the pattern would break, but every time we passed through a patch of light, both shadows appeared together, perfectly parallel. That's when I realized something else. The second shadow didn't match our movements exactly anymore. When our rickshaw slowed down, its shadow kept moving, just a little faster. When we turned left, it turned slightly earlier, like it knew where we were going. I leaned out farther, trying to see if maybe someone was beside us. My heart was hammering so loud, I could barely hear the engine. The road was empty, only the faint outline of trees and buildings sliding by. Then I saw it. The real thing, not the shadow. A second rickshaw behind us. No headlights, no sound. Just a dark shape gliding down the street. It looked wrong. Too smooth, too steady. Like it was being pulled by the darkness itself. And there was no driver. "Hey," I said, louder this time. "There's something following us." The driver didn't answer. He kept his eyes fixed on the road. I could see his hands, gripping the handlebars tighter. His knuckles were white. The other rickshaw drew closer, its shape clearer now under the pale light. The seat was empty. The wheel spun on its own. It wasn't rolling over the bumps. It was gliding, like it wasn't even touching the ground. "Do you see that?" I shouted. "Stop! Pull over!" He didn't. The second rickshaw's shadow began to slide ahead of ours, creeping forward on the road. It overtook us slowly, like a snake passing another snake. And the moment it did, the engine's sound changed, lower, rougher, like it was struggling to breathe. Then the driver finally spoke. "Don't talk," he said. His voice was flat. "Don't look." "What do you mean, don't?" I started, but he cut me off. "Don't." We drove like that for what felt like forever. The empty rickshaw stayed ahead, always just far enough to see its outline in the light, always moving the same speed. Every time we turned, it turned. Every time we slowed down, it glided slower too, never letting us catch up. I tried to look at the driver's face, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. His lips were moving silently. Maybe a prayer, maybe something else. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it ended. The second shadow vanished. 1 second it was there, dark and clear on the road, and the next it was gone. The sound of the engine evened out again. The air felt lighter, and the driver finally took a deep breath. I waited for him to say something. He didn't. I asked where we were, and he didn't answer. I asked if he wanted me to pay now. Still nothing. "Hey," I said, a little louder, tapping his shoulder. He stopped the rickshaw without warning, wheels screeching slightly. We were in the middle of nowhere. No shops, no lights, just an empty stretch of road lined with trees. The driver turned his head halfway, not enough for me to see his face, and said in a voice that didn't sound like his own, "Get down." I hesitated. "What?" He didn't repeat it, just pointed forward. When I looked, my stomach turned. Another rickshaw was parked in the middle of the road ahead. Same model, same color, even the same dent on the back fender. But there was no driver. The driver beside me muttered something in Hindi I couldn't catch. He took his hands off the handlebars, folded them together in a prayer gesture, and whispered something that sounded like an apology. Then he got off. He didn't even turn around. He just walked into the dark trees on the side of the road and disappeared. I sat there for a few seconds, frozen. Then I climbed out too, my legs shaking, and started walking in the opposite direction, back toward the faint glow of the city lights. When I finally flagged down another rickshaw, the new driver asked where I was headed. His voice was calm, normal. I told him my hotel name. He nodded. "That's near the river, yes?" "Yeah." He started the engine. "You are lucky," he said casually, eyes on the road. "Not many drivers take that route at night anymore." I frowned. "Why not?" He smiled faintly. "Too many stories," he said. "They say if a shadow passes you on that road, your own driver stops being yours." I didn't ask what that meant. I just watched the ground as we moved, watching the light and the shadows, praying there'd only be one. The monsoon school. If you've never experienced monsoon season in India, it's hard to imagine how completely it changes everything. The world gets quieter and louder at the same time. Rain hammering down like thousands of drummers, thunder rumbling through the air, and yet the streets seem to hold their breath. You can't escape the water. It fills every crack, every pothole, every room that isn't sealed tight. I was teaching English in a small town in Kerala that year. The school was old, built in the 1950s, with faded blue walls, wide windows with iron bars, and floors made of cracked concrete that turned slick whenever it rained. During dry months, it looked almost cheerful, but in the monsoon, it changed. Everything grew darker, quieter. The smell of damp books and rust never left. That afternoon, The rain had been coming down for hours. The courtyard outside the classrooms was already half flooded, water swirling with fallen leaves and bits of paper. The kids were supposed to be dismissed early, but most of them had nowhere else to go. Their homes were just as soaked. So, we stayed. When the bell finally rang, they ran through the rain laughing, holding their bags over their heads. I stayed behind to lock up. The sound of their voices faded, replaced by the endless roar of the rain. I was halfway down the hall when I saw the water creeping in under the classroom doors. Thin at first, then spreading wider, like fingers reaching across the floor. The whole corridor reflected the flickering fluorescent lights, turning it into a shimmering silver river. I sighed, rolled up my pants, and walked back to check the classrooms. The first few were fine, just puddles. But when I got to Class 8B, the water was ankle deep. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me immediately. Wet wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. The desks were floating slightly, bumping into each other with soft thuds. The light flickered, and in that flicker, something about the reflections caught my eye. In the water's surface, the room looked wrong. There were students, at least 20 of them, sitting at their desks in perfect rows. Their uniforms clung to their bodies, soaked through. Their hair was slicked down, dripping. They weren't distorted like reflections should be. Their outlines were sharp, too real. And every single one of them was staring straight ahead. I blinked hard and looked up. The room was empty. Just floating desks, the blackboard at the front, and the rain beating down on the roof. I crouched down, my heart pounding, and looked again at the water. The students were still there. They hadn't moved. But the one sitting in the front row, he was me. My reflection sitting among them, drenched, motionless, head bowed. The others around him were students I recognized, faces from old class photos. But they weren't from this year. Some had graduated years ago. Some I was sure weren't alive anymore. I stood up fast, stepping back, sending ripples across the water. The moment the surface broke, the figures wavered. Then all of them, all at once, stood up. I could hear it. The sound of chair legs scraping. Except it wasn't in the real room. It was inside the reflection. They began to move. The me in the water turned his head upward, eyes still dripping with rain, and met my gaze. The others behind him followed, rising from their seats, their soaked shoes splashing in unison. I stumbled backward, heart racing, my shoes slapping against the wet floor. I looked up again. Nothing. Still empty. But in the reflection, they were moving faster now, wading through the mirrored water toward where I stood. One of them reached the edge of the puddle, the edge of the reflection, and pressed his hands against it from below. As if it were glass, the surface rippled around his fingers. I turned and ran. The hallway lights were dim, the thunder outside shaking the ceiling. The water on the floor made it hard to move fast. Each step sent waves behind me. I didn't look back until I was almost at the office. From there, I could see the classrooms behind me. The water was darker now, almost black. The reflections still moved, even though nothing above them did. When I reached the staff room, the janitor was sitting on a stool by the door, staring at the rain through the open window. "You shouldn't be here after hours," he said, without looking at me. His tone was calm, like he'd said it 100 times. "The classrooms, they're flooding," I stammered. "And there's something in the water." He finally turned his head toward me, eyes heavy, tired. "You saw them?" It wasn't a question. I stared at him, trying to process it. "What are they?" He wiped rainwater from his face with the back of his hand. "When the flood came, long time ago, many years before you came. They stayed behind. Teachers told them to go home, but they were waiting for their marks, their exams. He pointed toward the hall. Water rose fast. They never left. My mouth went dry. You mean they drowned? He nodded slowly. Every year when the first flood comes back, they come too. Sit where they used to. Wait for someone to tell them class is over. The rain outside grew louder, pounding like drums. I looked back down the hallway. The lights flickered again. For a split second, I saw the faint silhouettes, standing at the far end. Wet uniforms, dripping hair, all facing me. Then the power went out. Everything went black, except for the lightning flashing through the windows. In those flashes, I could see the water, rippling, moving. But it wasn't from the rain. It was from footsteps, coming closer. I ran out into the storm, the rain soaking me to the bone in seconds. I didn't stop until I reached the gate, where the streetlight was still on, casting a pale yellow circle on the flooded road. When I looked back one last time, I saw the reflection of the school in the water. Empty building, silent and gray, but in the water's surface, through the shimmer of the rain, I could still see them. Rows of students standing by their desks, waiting, and right in front of them, the reflection of me, still inside, still looking out. The train crossing. If you've ever been stuck at a train crossing in India, you know how long those moments can feel. The air smells like hot metal and diesel, the heat from the pavement climbs into your shoes, and the sound of the train's horn echoes through your chest. It's the kind of stillness that only exists when everything is forced to stop. Rickshaws idling, scooters balancing on tiptoe, people standing in clusters, waiting for the barrier to lift. That night, I was driving back from a small town near Lucknow. The road was empty except for a few trucks and stray dogs sleeping by the roadside. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the air was still wet, heavy, full of the scent of mud and burned plastic. When I reached the railway crossing, the red lights were already blinking. The barrier began to lower with a mechanical groan. I sighed, put the car in neutral, and rolled down my window. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low rumble of the train approaching. The first carriages came into view. A long line of freight cars, dull brown and covered in graffiti, moving slowly enough to count the bolts on their sides. I leaned on the steering wheel, waiting for them to pass. Then I saw it. A hand. It slipped out through one of the small rectangular windows on a cargo carriage. Pale, wet-looking, fingers spread wide. It hung there for a few seconds, then disappeared back inside. I frowned. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe a loose tarp, or some kind of reflection. But then another hand appeared from the next carriage, and then another, and another. One after another, as each carriage rolled by, arms extended from the windows, thin, dripping, reaching out into the night air. They weren't waving. They weren't moving wildly. They all reached in the same direction, toward me. My stomach tightened. I looked around to see if anyone else was seeing this. There were a few motorbikes behind me, their riders staring at the train with blank faces. I thought maybe they were too far back to notice. But then I looked across the road. On the opposite side of the tracks, where the barrier cut the other lane, a group of people stood waiting. About a dozen of them, men, women, kids, all silent. None of them held umbrellas, even though the road was still slick with rain. They weren't talking, just standing there, still as statues. And they were all pointing, their right arms stretched out, hands open, fingers spread, pointing at the train. I don't know why, but that broke something inside me. My body wanted to move, to drive, to do something, but I couldn't even reach for the gear stick. I just stared, frozen, watching the train slide by in the sea of arms. Some real, some reflected, reaching through the dark. The train was long, too long. It felt like it would never end. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I forced myself to look away from the carriages, down at the steering wheel, then at the road beside me. Just water, asphalt, puddles reflecting the red warning lights. But the reflection was wrong. In the puddle beside my car, I could see the train's shadow, the red lights blinking over and over. And in that reflection, dozens, no, hundreds of arms were reaching up from the ground, pushing through the surface of the water, stretching toward the passing train. I turned off the headlights. I don't even know why. Maybe I didn't want to see. The sound of the train wheels grew louder, closer, like thunder rolling through metal. Then it happened. The last few carriages began to slow, and for the briefest moment, I saw faces behind those windows. White, featureless shapes pressed against the glass. Not screaming. Not moving. Just staring. The final carriage passed, the red light on its back, fading into the distance. And then, silence. The crossing barrier lifted with a slow, creaking sound. The blinking red lights turned off. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of it. The puddles reflected nothing now. Just my car, the barrier, and the road ahead. When I looked across the tracks again, the people were gone. Every single one of them. No bikes, no footsteps, in the wet mud. Just emptiness. I sat there for maybe a minute, listening to the distant echo of the train. Then I started the car, hands shaking on the wheel, and drove off. A few kilometers later, I stopped at a roadside tea stall that was still open. The old man running it smiled when he saw me. "Late night?" he asked. I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Got stuck at the crossing." He stopped stirring his tea for a second. "The one near the canal?" "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "That's the one they say is haunted." I laughed nervously. "Of course it is." "Why?" He poured the tea into a small paper cup, his hand steady. "That train," he said, "used to carry bodies during the floods, years ago. The water took everything, people, animals, homes. No one counted how many. They loaded them into the freight cars to take them away, to burn them." He slid the cup toward me. "But sometimes they say, when the water rises again, the train passes back through." I didn't say anything, just stood there, the steam from the tea fogging my glasses. He added quietly, "Don't stare at it next time. If you do, they might think you're calling to them." I left without finishing my drink. That night I kept hearing it in my head, the sound of the train wheels, the low, scraping thunder that never seemed to stop. And once, just before I finally drifted to sleep, I could have sworn I heard it again, outside my window. The long metallic groan of a barrier lowering, the faint echo of a horn. When I opened my eyes, the curtains were moving in the wind. And from somewhere in the distance, I could see a faint red blinking light, reflected in a puddle that hadn't been there before.